So thank you, thank you very much for the invitation to this symposium. I'm not sure that this also how we should call it, that it is a symposium. I apologize also for the fact that I could not attend yesterday's sessions and could only briefly listen to the presentations regarding the initiatives Plaine Commune, INTERNATION and Les Amis de Thunberg, which I think, as was stated rightly, I think testify not only of Bernard Stiegler's commitment, but belonged entirely to his work, which has to be taken also in the way which was also indicated yesterday as opening a world, and which is in fact, at least for me, so impressive that I feel that I'm, and together with what I heard today, that I feel that I might not be able to live up to the challenge to offer a real contribution to this symposium. So I am not a philosopher. I might, in fact, not only have missed yesterday some things that affect what I want to say, but above all, I have read and seen and heard only what I think to be a small part of what Bernard Stiegler contributed in terms of tertiary retention, to use his words. So it might be all there what I'm going to say. But even if that turns out to be the case, I always found it and find it difficult to refuse an invitation, because they are also very often an occasion. And I also want to express in this way my gratitude in trying to contribute to his honoring. And as he stated himself in a lecture which he gave in Cambridge on the role of the university, to which I will come back, and I quote, "The only way of honoring a philosophy is analyzing its limits, or the shadows of the light it sheds." In a certain way, I could say that I want to do something in that direction, but given what I just said about my very limited knowledge, it will be in a very modest way, trying to avoid any arrogance. And since I'm not convinced that this is the only way of honoring, I will first briefly try to point to how his work contributes also today to the understanding of the importance of school, which is, as you will know, in relation to the closure of schools in large parts of the world today, part of a public debate in which school is not only defended by parents and by policy makers, be it mainly for economic reasons, because children at home make work difficult for the parents, and not going to school threatens the investments in human capital. But very surprisingly, certainly for those who since long are criticizing the school, equating it with an inefficient, outdated, boring, disciplining form of learning, also by youngsters themselves. Even digital brains with access to internet and social media seems to want school, which is interpreted as that they are longing for their friends. I will come back to that, but I think it is important to underline that the work of Bernard Stiegler allows to shed light on other reasons, I think, than economic ones to defend school, especially today. In his text on the Enlightenment of 2013, which sounds, I think, very topical in the present conditions, where access to internet, in the present condition, where access to internet, connectivity, and to personal computers is one of the important rights that is claimed in order to allow for education in times in which school in a physical sense is not possible. And I just refer to a very recent text of the UNESCO about COVID, of education in COVID and post-COVID times, so this right to internet and connectivity. So Bernard Stiegler in his text agrees with Tim Berners-Lee and Harry Halpin that we should defend a universal right to internet access. But he also asks, what do we actually mean by access? and under which conditions it is beneficial. And I think he offers all kinds of arguments to formulate as a response that we should create school conditions. Or to put it differently, that we should complement the right to internet access in the context of today with the right to school, which is the right of the new generations to obtain a certain freedom. Stiegler in his text is referring to the famous phrase of Kant and this notion of Mündigkeit, a kind of freedom of thought and action with regard to the forces of the audiovisual and the web and of the digital technical system of which it is a function. And I quote also Bernard Stiegler, the digital being the most recent stage of grammatization, where all behavioral models can now be grammatized and integrated through a planetary-wide industry of production, collection, exploitation, and distribution of digital traces, which is, I find, one of these fantastic phrases in which he can summarize and synthesize a lot of issues of today. So this notion of grammatization, which he himself borrows from Auroux and develops from there, is very crucial, as you all know, and is also very fruitful. And he makes this also clear through, at least from my point of view, so I am not coming from philosophy, as I said, but from pedagogy, which he makes clear through a wonderful history of the grammatization of speech through the alphabet, which allowed the invention of reading and writing practices, which actually require school as an institution to make sure that as being a pharmacon, they become not toxic, making school into an issue also of care, of prendre soin, so not of production. I think this is also still a very important contribution. So, oh, there is some more. So I think so this way in which he talks about school and relates school so to the issue of care, of prendre soin. I think in the actual context in which school, also the university, is very strongly related to the notion of production, production of learning outcomes, production of impact, production, and so on and so on, that this idea of educational institutions as care institutions, I think, is very important. And it is important also to emphasize the operation of this grammatization that allows a materialization, so a tangible reality of tertiary retentions, which can be analyzed, criticized, and manipulated, as he says, in both senses, which also can contribute to create what he calls long circuits, although I must confess immediately that I'm not really sure that I can understand really what he means with these long circuits. So reading, he says, and he quotes Marianne Wolf, was invented and reorganized the brain, which in turn expanded the way in which we were able to think. And now we have the web as a space through which shared digital tertiary retentions are projected and introjected, constituting a new public, global, and contributing space, functioning at the speed of light. And so now we become digital brains. But he points also to the fact that the introjection or the return of this projection is crucial. It is crucial in order to make this projection coming to life. This introjection is the process of the constitution of knowledge. This introjection needs to be taken care of and to be ensured through practices like, and I quote him, like the paideia practice in Plato's academy. And I think that the work of Bernard Stiegler helps us to make clear so that the right to education, as I said, is to be expanded into the right to school, and that this right is not guaranteed by the simple, maybe not so simple, access to internet and personal computers, which is, of course, also an issue, but because in order to offer the generations the access to knowledge, so not to information, and the opportunity to contribute to the shaping of new forms of society, there should also be developed practices and tools to take care of the grammatization that is implied in the constitution of thought under the current conditions. So, for example, as he formulates it, and I quote again, to know that invisible automatisms exist, referring to these algorithms, and that these may elude digital brains and may manipulate these brains without teaching them how they should themselves be manipulated, how they should be handled. So school, I think he offers a lot of arguments to say that school is not simply to be replaced by personalized digital and automated learning environments and social media, which are not as such constituting a community of digital brains that have a certain freedom or autonomy, but are being based on feedback and creating what we call learning communities that threaten to create mainly functionaries, capitalizing attention, grammatizing the learning itself, in order not to slow it down and allow thinking and deep attention, but precisely to accelerate and make it productive, make it an efficient and effective production of learning outcomes. As you will, I think, recognize this language from the way in which the whole European educational system is organized by this ECTS, yes, this credit transfer system, which is precisely built around this idea that learning is the production of outcomes. It's essentially a production process, and hence it is a process that we have to discuss in terms of efficiency and effectivity. So I agree with Bernard Stiegler that there is no school before writing and reading, as he says. But I think we should be clear that in order to learn to write and to read, one does not need school. Just as to learn to use computers is something which seems to go more or less naturally. We don't need schools. I think that we need schools in order to develop practices that allow to make us fit to take care of worlds, for example, the world of language, and that in order to do this, grammatization is indeed crucial. And for thinking about the practices to deal with the new tertiary recensions, I found particularly interesting and fruitful how he extends the operation of grammatization to the audiovisual temporal flux, for example, in his texts about the analysis of YouTube videos, or the practice related to suspension and to repetition, the practice where also Erich Hörl today referred to in relation to his discussion of Charlie Parker. So, but let me turn maybe to some shadow, if you want, some shadow, as he formulates it himself, which of course is a place where you also can get lost. So Bernard Stiegler observes, and I quote, that writing opened the space for calm living, otium or skole, instead of negotium, in order to fully cultivate the economy of existence. End of quote. I am, however, not sure that writing opened that space. I think that this otium, which I think in fact existed before writing, was at some point indeed offered to all. So it is a quote from Stiegler also, to say to otium for the people, at least in principle. And that when it became organized, not just for the exercise of the body, but also for the mind, by embracing the art of writing, which was not what Socrates or Plato did, but what Isocratis did, who is much more important for the history of school as an invention of care. And therefore, one of the commentators also on the work of Isocrates could say that it was Isocrates that offered the gift of time to oratory by bringing writing and reading to school as their central activities, but also through all kinds of practices to deal with them. It is in fact Isocrates who is the inventor of the essay, the dictation, the recitation, the reading out loud, all kinds of practices to deal with words that, of course, are only available because they are written. Huh? So they and you can write and you can read them. But these practices, I think, are very crucial. And it were these practices that created a delay and a suspension, which is a notion which has been talked about also today in very interesting ways, a suspension of all kinds of urgencies. Suspension being a crucial element of school. Suspension in English meaning to put temporarily out of effect. And so away from the courtroom and outside the General Assembly, there was no longer the constraint of urgency. For example, the contingent demands of a client's interest to learn to speak in order to defend her or his interest. So the time, this free time or the time of the school time, was created not as such, I think, through the grammatization, but created through these practices which made use, which dealt with this grammatization, which at once also opened a world which could be appreciated for its beauty. That means outside the context of its daily use and outside the context of that it should have a kind of effect in that world. And I think it is important to acknowledge, and not simply trying to cure or to tame, that indeed the capacity to read and to write allows to go into all directions. Once you can read and once you can write, as Isocratis already mentioned, you can go in all directions. It is public in a way, it can go in all directions. And I think that at least at some points, the way in which Bernard Stiegler is, or at some moments, is talking about school as an institution and about instituting, relating it to the long circuits of transmission and to some kind of what I hear as, but maybe I'm wrong, a kind of progressive history, relating it also to reason and episteme, since he says the school should contribute to producing the positivity of the pharmacon, makes, I think, his understanding of school at least ambivalent. And it is maybe related, and it is also something one could discuss, but it is maybe related to his philosophical background, you could say, because I think you could say that philosophy in general has usually a big difficulty to accept the possibility of a renewal without reason, of a change being the contingent, so without reason, being the contingent result of learning and exercise, which from a pedagogical, so not a philosophical, but a pedagogical point of view is what school is also about pedagogical renewal, since it is about a kind of transmission for which interruption is crucial. So what is transmitted is grammatized, is transmitted in a way it is grammatized, but it is also, to use a phrase that maybe can remind us to, or can sound a little bit Arendtian, to reference to Hannah Arendt, but also put on the table. It can be refused and it can be fundamentally questioned, which is also why it allows the experience for the generations to experience themselves as new generations. So Stiegler, at some points in his work, at least as far as I know his work, equates the school with actually he does it. He equates the school with an institution of the state, which instaurs and institutes an order of individuation through the intermediary of the teacher as an instituteur, or in the old French, the instituteur, which is, and these are all quotes, in fact, from his work, which is also representative of the state. where I think that from a pedagogical perspective, the teacher is not a representative of the state, but a presenter of the world, which is not simply the state. When you talk in this way about the school as a kind of institution of the state, I think that from a pedagogical point of view, this is already a kind of appropriation, a kind of appropriation or taming of the school, which is in fact stating something that I think is one of the fundamental beliefs. And there has been, we have been talking also, I think, about a belief or a creed, which one of the fundamental beliefs of the school is that our children are not our children. That at school, our children are no longer our sons or daughters. They are no longer the sons of the daughters of the family, of their biological fathers and mothers, but they are also not sons and daughters of the nation or of the national family. They are precisely pupils and students. That means they are in fact orphans. And this brings me to something that has been touched upon today also by Annette Rouvroy about this issue of adoption. I think it's very interesting to talk about adoption and not adaptation, about adoption starting from the characterization of people as orphans. And the Latin notion pupillus, the first meaning of the Latin notion pupillus, for which in the French and in the English, the pupil, the first meaning is indeed also orphan. So not student, so to say, but orphan. Yeah, and I think using this notion of adoption, I think, is a very interesting one. But on the other hand, I also think it could make that it becomes again a kind of process of becoming part of a family, of having fathers and mothers, which maybe is related. So this is just, I'm not sure about this, but this is maybe related to the still, I think, strong psychoanalytic framework that is present in this thinking about the orphan and about adoption. And I think that at school, the orphan does not find a family or a state, or even not a filia, I think, but other orphans, which are equally pupils like any other, all pupils, and that they are there, that they do not find a family or a state, but orphans, to build a community, not the community of a family, but I would say the community of work, of the kind of work that Michel Foucault formulated with a very, in a formulation which I like very much, which he said, the undefined work of freedom, which in fact implies a kind of suspension and delay and the possibility of new directions and of a kind of attention to the world. Indeed, when you can read everything, and the school is not there to tell you what you have to read, but can, I think we have to use another language, but can invite you to start to belong, for example, to the world of literature, to the world of the birds, to the world of numbers, to the world of woodworking. And I think that in order to make this invitation work, so, and there has been a lot of talk also about this, about the world or the lack of world, and I think that school is related to this issue. So about inviting to a world and offer you the opportunity to start to belong to that to a world. I think that in order to make this invitation work, we might maybe have to pay attention again or more attention to the voice of the teacher and not only to the letters. And the attention to the voice as the communication not of a message, but as Jean-Luc Nancy has very, very nicely clarified, which is not the communication of a message, but the communication of a force. Hence, a force that is not to be understood, but to be received. A force to make the world sound. And in order to make the world sound, one has to go in a certain way through language, like one has to go through the looking glass to make that we can attend the world. And I would also like to emphasize this reference to attend, which is allowed in the English attention, that it is about to attend, to become near, to literally approach or be near, to attend something. And in that sense, I think we should be clear that school masters, and this is an old word, but I like that word much more than the teacher, because the school master, the teacher, I think it's important to say that just as when things go to school, they are, in a way, they are transformed, just like as when our sons and daughters go to school, they become pupils. I think teachers become school teachers and they have to make school, and that is something different. That means that they are not, that it is not about teaching a lesson. And of course, concrete schools are often in that sense, these schools, not schools, yes? But that it is not, when it is a school, it is not about teaching a lesson, but I think it is about opening up, disclosing up a world which means precisely to make it speak, yeah? To make it into something that can speak to me. And so let me now come back to this appeal of youngsters. So these digital brains that have access to internet and to social media, that have sometimes more than one computer, than personal computer. So I'm not talking here about the students or the pupils that have no computer, and there is an issue of the access to, I don't deny that, not at all. But to come back to the appeal of youngsters who have digital brains, who have access and access to internet and social media for school, which is unexpected, I think, and some might say and are saying that they just want to see their friends, or that it is just nostalgia to a school that never existed, thereby overlooking the many bad experiences that are for sure also related to school. But the hypothesis that I want to formulate is precisely that these youngsters are pointing to something existential about school education, which cannot simply be replaced by digital learning environments and social networks. What I think they miss is a particular experience of freedom related to the fact that they are liberated from their family, but I think also related to a certain liberation from the social media and from their friends on social media, to an experience of equality, being a pupil like all others, and especially also to an experience of world, which I think is offered when school actually happens. I think that indeed, from a pedagogical point of view, school is not an institution, but a gathering that makes something happen. It is about an event that is happening and that discloses a world that starts to speak. So these are just, I don't want to formulate this at all as a kind of critique or whatever, but I try to move a little bit in what I think are some of the shadows of the light that the work of Bernard Stiegler is shedding on school and on the importance of school. And I think it is still very important precisely also to rediscover, I think, school as a workplace, as a place where we work, not a kind of, and not as a place for a kind of natural learning, but where working on and with and through the grammatizations is at once also a way to, in his words, to de-automatize. That is also to denaturalize learning, and so to get rid of this idea that school is about learning, or this very general idea that school is about learning. So let me now, and this allows me also to go from the school to the university. In a short text on the formation of new reason, in which he also offers 7 propositions for the school, Bernard Stiegler states, and I find it really very interesting, that in order to think about the future of the school, we have to think about the future of the university and not the opposite. Because if you would do the opposite, it would mean to state that you would have to think about school first starting from extra scholastic needs, economic, political ones, social, religious ones, and that doing this would be a way to impose then on the university these non-academic imperatives. For him, the university itself should first turn to its own finality, which he there describes as the formation to research, or the allowing the heuristic experience. And hence, he says, for example, that the education of school teachers, and hence that it is about the education of school teachers as people that are engaged in research, and the same being true for all other kinds of professional formation that the university is offering, to form them as rational minds by confronting them with heuristic experience, that is critical experience. And so these are all quotes again, yes. And he further explicates this by referring to Plato's academy and to the Socratic dialogue as being at the center of a community of peers that argue rationally. And that means that make out of all historical, geographical, literary, and so on experiences or experiments, logical ones, heuristic, critical, rational, in the sense that they are also exposed to the public debate of the academic community. I think this sounds, in fact, rather Habermasian. And even if he states against Plato's own suggestion that the academy is the place where one practices the technical hypnosis, which gives access to anamnesic experience, so writing, it is indeed clear, so against Plato, it is indeed clear that he takes the academy as a reference point to think about the university. And that this idea of community of peers that argue rationally is strongly present here. Again, I think this is a very, like I tried to say, that going back for thinking the school also to Plato and to Plato and Socrates is ignoring, I think, another way, or ignoring, or is putting in the shadow another way to think about the school, which is offered by Isocratis. I think also here that I think that this also is a kind of very philosophical thinking about the university, which makes that the pedagogy involved, that means the organization of a gathering that offers the power to think, even if it is referring to research, and I have to be very careful, I think, to formulate this, is in fact, or seems sometimes in fact, based on a kind of trickle-down epistemology. A trickle-down epistemology where the pedagogy is indeed about teaching lessons. So it is telling, I think, that he does not refer to the origin of the university in the Middle Ages as a kind of original European invention, but he's referring to the academy. And he's also, to the origin of the university as an academy, and so not to the invention of the university as an universitas studii, which was not at first an institution. I think the institution was already, again, a taming of the movement, of the pedagogical movement. Durkheim is speaking about the pedagogical life of the university, which was a movement of thought where people gather, which is the meaning of the universitas, an association as students, which is not as colleagues or peers, at least not in the sense that we use today, this notion of peer review, where the peer review, so peers in that sense as colleagues, and where the crucial practice, as Humboldt states, which is even more important for science than the gathering with peers in the academy, is precisely, so that is what Humboldt is saying, so not the academy, but the gathering and confrontation with students. A gathering in which it is about giving something of the world the power to think and make sure that we pay attention, in French, to faire attention, that we pay attention to our abstractions. Yeah, I'm going to stop. I'm so sorry, just, yeah, I'm going to. So, yeah. So the way our rational thoughts affect lives. So, in fact, trying to organize ways in which our thinking can be objected, also not only by our peers, but also by those who are affected by our thinking. So I have not the time apparently to continue this, but I wanted to just to conclude that I like very much his idea that he is formulating in his presentation for in Cambridge, that the university, that he is calling the university to get along with the pharmacon and to find practices to go along with the pharmacon. And I also agree with what is stated in the invitation to this symposium, that more than anybody else, Bernard Stiegler led us to interrogate both the misery and the emancipative potential of the new media. And so that we should think about how to have these new practices. And so the fact that we are forced into online existence and have an online academic life in such an extreme way today is for sure an occasion to think about practices to go along with this fact, with this pharmacon. And it is clear from the image that I see before me, and I suppose also you, is that it contributes to a grammatization, a discretion of academic life. You are framed as isolated beings. We are isolated in that sense also together. So it literally shows us as being one. But it thinks also, I think also that that it forces us, and that is why I said in the beginning that I'm not sure that we are having a symposium, or that it is a symposium, or that is the right name for what we are doing, that we precisely have to think about how these digital tools could create a kind of, could help to create a kind of mood, which I would like to relate, and this is the last thing I'm going to say to what Friedrich Schiller called the mittlere Stimmung, the mood of the middle, where one experiences one under a moral, political, or psychic coercion, and where something can address us and make us think. And so I think we should try to find out ways to do that. Maybe, for example, to think about the backgrounds that we show now, maybe thinking about the costumes that we wear to show, to talk here, to be present here, and all these kinds of things, in order to be sure that we are not just living an angelic existence in the clouds, but that we are able to make, and not only are allowed to launch all kinds of ideas, but that we also can make them land and make that students and ourselves, we are not angels without bodies or mothers or matters, sorry. and so try to make matter really into matter of thought. And I think so that precisely pedagogy is in that sense a kind of front line of the university. I will stop here.